Hey, we're a little early actually. I scheduled this for 5, but hey, you know what? Let's get it going. Uh, as I mentioned the other day, Helios, patron of mine, friend of mine, Twitter dude, uh, very critical thinker, wanted to ask some questions to me about knowledge, and I don't know, there's a philosophical type stuff that everybody loves. People say they wanted some more philosophical content on this channel, and they're right. I do need to put up, even though before when I mentioned things like atheism and agnosticism, people would lose their shit, right? Especially like Matt Dillahunty. No, little pun there. Sorry. But we do need to get back a bit more into that. I do want to have a lot more philosophical and scientific content because that's actually what my Patreons are interested in. Although I love Caffeine Corner with Chesh, who's here too for this because we know her philosophical
Hi.
expertise. Um, but I wanted to have Elos come in and kind of do a Q&A with him and the audience and other people that was asking me as well, because I have a lot of new people. And, of course, many of you probably heard a lot of stuff before, so you probably won't be interested. You know, do what you got to do. I mean, I just think this is going to be entertaining and informative. People that have been inundated with messages recently, even on Twitter, saying, hey, Steve, what is this deal with agnosticism and atheism? Because we have so many new people coming. So I thought this would be fun. Anyways,
Steve, we
Chesh.
got two down. We got two down votes because you're talking about agnosticism.
Yeah, there you go. I'm telling
After
you.
that Matt Dillahunty joke.
So, but Matt, if I say Matt Dillahunty, I get downvoted, and Aaron Raw, I get downvoted. Um,
Right.
Whatever. You know, one of these days, maybe
Yeah.
they'll come around. They're getting
Maybe.
a lot of pushback, by the way. Especially Matt. He's getting so much pushback, I guess, from people that are going, you know, hey, you need to stop dissing on Steve because you're looking kind of silly. But whatever. At least I think that he is. That's what I've heard.
Yeah.
Helios, though, welcome, buddy.
Hello. Thank you.
How you doing?
I'm doing very good. Had a busy day today, but otherwise good.
Sweet. So I'm kind of looking forward to this because I kind of like to be probed on this. I sound more dirty in my head, but I just had somebody on Twitter just like a second ago having this conversation, and one thing I said to them was, you're a science guy, and you're telling people shouldn't use philosophical terms when they're having a philosophical discussion. That to me is akin like saying, hey, well, this is Twitter's not a science class, so why should we, use rigorous terminology like evolution as a change of allelic frequency, as opposed to just change, right? I mean, if you're going to be an educator, you have to understand that there are different fields and domains of discourse, and just because you're interested in science, which I am, doesn't preclude you from being just as rigorous in other fields. And even though I'm not an educator, I'm not trying to throw that out there, but I do educate. There's a difference there. But anyway, so what do you have for us? I mean, what was some of the things that you were trying to figure out when it comes to this whole agnosticism, atheism?
Well, I have heard you say many times before that agnosticism and atheism are kind of similar. In fact, the thing that made me want to question this was your agnostic atheist is a nonsensical statement. But the roots of agnosticism and atheism are separate. Gnostic just is the root of knowledge, your how you know things, your certainty. Atheism is your theological belief, if you believe in gods or not.
Now,
So
I have to ask you: are you familiar with what's called an etymological fallacy?
I am, but I am also coming at this from like just a straight layman's
Sure, of course.
perspective.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm a layman too.
Yeah. So for when people are trying to speak and they're you know the root of those words or even just have a vague idea, you can have someone who wants to describe themselves as, I am for sure that I know that there is no God as a Gnostic atheist. But if they say that, well, there may or may not be a God, I'm not convinced either way, but I fall on the I don't quite believe, that would be an agnostic atheist, and so on and so forth down the line until you get to the hard there is definitely God, we can prove him, blah blah blah, as the Gnostic theist. So it's more to me, I see those terms more as a sliding scale between the two.
All right, well, let's kind of dive into that because there's some issues there. One, there obviously is the root derivations of these words, right? The origins of these words, and that words are derived from those origins. When you're doing gnosis, right, which was knowledge, yes, it was. That's what it means. And there was a group of people called Gnostics that believed in Gnosticism around the 2nd, 3rd century. These were people that thought they had divine knowledge directly from God. Later, some of them actually believed it was from Jesus, but it was originally just they had this divine knowledge, hidden knowledge that was from God.
Mm-hmm.
But the term agnostic itself, the term agnosticism itself was coined, right? It was actually coined by Thomas Henry Huxley. And the reason he came up with it was because he wanted to have a term that he felt really kind of put his position out there, which they didn't really have a term for at the time, because he said he felt like a fox without a tail was his description. He was at a party, and he came up with the term agnosticism. His usage of it is archaic. It's not how we normatively use it in nowadays, and it's not how you see it in philosophy. It was actually a methodology. It was very similar to the scientific method, very similar to logical positivism, which is the position that things don't even have any real meaning unless you can show that they're true or false propositionally. And so when you start talking about agnosticism and you say, well, yeah, it deals with knowledge, that's a very archaic usage of the term, and that's not how it's used nowadays. And so what we wanted to say, what they wanted to do is they wanted to have a word for each what's called epistemic disposition, right? So give it any proposition, pick anything. The sky is blue, okay? That's a proposition. It's called truth apt. It could be true or false, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you believe that proposition is true, right? That's a propositional disposition toward it. I believe the sky is blue, right? Or you can have disbelief, which is the belief of the negation. Okay, it is not just merely unbelief. It's not just not believing. Disbelief logically is I believe not P. So you can have disbelief, which would be I believe the sky is not blue, right? Or you can have a position of I don't have a position on the topic either way. I don't believe that the sky is blue, and I don't believe the sky is not blue. I withhold judgment on. I suspend judgment, it's called. That's the agnostic position when it comes to the ontological question of God existing. So if the theist believes gods exist, right, they have the belief that God exists. Atheism in the literature, and it is mostly understood to be the negation of that proposition, not the belief, but the negation of the proposition. So I believe God exists. I believe God does not exist. So you have theism, atheism, and then agnosticism is that position that I don't have a position either way. It is a belief position. It's a second order belief position. So it's not having to do with knowledge, and this is where a lot of people get confused. When we say I'm agnostic with respect to a proposition, it is not saying anything about knowledge. It is not changing the predicate from belief to knowledge. It is saying I do not have a belief position either way. It is a second order belief, meaning that it is a belief about a belief. That makes sense? That's where the disconnect comes in, because you hear people, you hear these atheists on these larger channels like Atheist Experience and people that promote American atheists, and they throw what you just set out, right? But they have no academic standing for any of that. There just hardly isn't. Paul Draper mentions it very, very tertiary, like in SEP. And he basically even says if people actually thought about it, they probably wouldn't use this terminology, because you're juxtaposing ontology with epistemology. But you're right in one aspect. The term Gnostic atheist, right? That is sensical, by the way. I hate that word. It's not really a word, but it's not nonsensical. Because Gnostic atheist, even though I don't like mixing the two, is at least saying you believe that God does not exist, and you're also adding the modifier, the epistemic modifier, that you actually know that God does not exist. So belief is a subset of knowledge, contrary to what Katie and Chloe always argues, because she's absolutely wrong on that. In any kind of belief first thing, belief is a prerequisite for knowledge. You cannot have knowledge unless you have belief. So in that case, Gnostic atheist is not nonsensical, right? But I didn't say that before. I've always said that agnostic atheist is nonsensical in the way that the American atheist uses the term atheist in the lack belief position. There it is nonsensical, because you have to have belief before you can have a knowledge modification. That's why it's nonsensical. You can't say I lack a belief in something, but I don't know. It doesn't make much sense, because one's a subset of the other.
Okay, so I have met people on both sides of the faith line, the atheist, where, I don't know everything, I'm willing to be convinced, but I currently don't believe, and I don't know everything, I'm willing to be convinced, I do believe in God. So what would you use as the terms for those two things? Because they are very, very similar, but they are distinct.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, and matter of fact, I think it was the last blog that I wrote, and I think it's in the video description because I usually put the link to the last blog that I wrote, and the last one was on epistemic justification, and I make the argument, and I've actually ran this to Ozzy and other people. I haven't had any pushback on it. That saying something along the lines of I do not believe something because I haven't seen enough evidence or I'm not convinced is vacuous. It is non-informative. And the reason why I argue this, and I've never seen anybody really argue this, and I think it's kind of odd that nobody's even looked at it before. But the reason why I came up with this argument is because if you really look at what you're saying, you're basically saying, I don't believe because I don't believe. You're not giving any real epistemic justification for why you don't have a particular position on something. I can use deduction to deduce that if you do not believe something, you haven't been exposed to enough evidence or enough information or have not been convinced of it. I can do that by deduction, right? Because if you had been, you would be a theist. When you want to justify something, you want to use induction or something. You want to use something that along those lines to give us more information. Induction gives us more information, deduction doesn't. So if I can deduce it, you're not telling me anything new of what justifies you to withhold affirmation or to not believe something or to believe something. These are not telling me anything by you just saying, well, I don't believe because I haven't been exposed to enough evidence or I'm not convinced yet. Yeah, that is not a justificatory reason to withhold affirmation. Does that make sense? Because if you said, well, I don't believe this because in my experience, this, or here's, these arguments seem to be more outweighing these arguments. Those are justification that I could not deduce from just you saying, well, I don't believe. But as soon as you say, I don't believe, I can tell people by deduction, you have not been exposed to enough evidence or information to convince you, and you haven't been convinced. That's simple, right?
Yeah, I understand that.
By the way, Chesh, if you want to weigh in and recap all that, that's cool. I feel like she's just sitting there looking for, like, it's just like, I'm just Chesh. I'm here.
Questions.
She's like, I got prettied up for this.
I'm hanging out in chat, and I've been collecting questions for whenever
cool.
you guys are ready to dive into that kind of stuff. You want me to sum it up? American atheists use a wishy-washy term so they don't actually have to justify or talk about anything substantial when it comes to philosophy on their show.
Wow, that's actually pretty damn accurate.
You wanted it succinct.
She's come a long way. Okay.
So then let's substantiate a bit. Let's give information. I grew up in a very fun religious household. I grew up as Greek Orthodox in a particular church that pride themselves that they haven't changed for 200 plus years. We had to fight to get even speakers installed because that would have been a change. Women weren't allowed back behind the altar because they were considered impure, all of the fun old traditions. I was sent to school in a Roman Catholic school, learning all of their stuff. So I've had a lot of all of the Christianity poured right into me. I then also enjoyed looking at mythology and studying a lot of different mythologies. Through all of my various studies in religion and in the various mythologies and the religions of the past, because honestly, that's all mythology is. It's past religions that people just stop believing. I've kind of come to the conclusion that there isn't really a distinction between monotheism and polytheism as how the church would like you to believe. It's just they took the big guy, made him God, and then took everyone that's beneath him and made them angels and archangels and cherubims and thrones and all that.
They didn't even take the big guy. They promoted a war god above his station. But at the same time, keep in mind that you could
Yahweh.
make a cogent yeah, you could make a
Mhm.
cogent argument to say that the Christian God, or the God of Catholicism and the God of Judeo-Christianity and the God of um, Islam are all polytheist anyway because their God has three portions. So
Yes.
there's an argument to be made that
Yeah,
there
I'm not,
technically
I'm not disagreeing with
is
him any
more
so
than one
far.
God, even though they're all really one God.
But you notice, Chess, he's actually giving his justification right now for why he holds a particular position or doesn't hold a position. So I'm not
Mhm.
disagreeing with anything he's saying, but he's actually giving justifications.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Oh
continue.
yeah, well I think a lot of people get confused about when Steve says he's agnostic, he doesn't necessarily mean he's agnostic about the Christian God. I'm pretty sure most people agree that the God, at least as he's described in the Christian Bible, is that's not a thing. But if you say you're agnostic, it means that even if it essentially means that, yeah, I guess there are other possibilities.
Something along those
Whereas
lines.
We
whereas
said that's
Steve
a naughty word.
might be yeah, Steve might be atheist about specific God, but he's not going to label himself as an atheist because the possibility still
I
exists as
use the
far as
terms
he's concerned.
globally, not locally. I mean, Russell
Yeah.
Bertrand would have gone locally sometimes, but that's fine. You can do that, but I think it's very confusing when you start differentiating between global atheism and local atheism.
But to continue on here,
Sure.
um, so that's my knowledge base. That's what I studied. Now, with every knowledge base, it doesn't really matter what you study unless you put it into context. I was very religious growing up. I believed in all this. I even believed in all of this at the same time because I just believed that as people came along, they redefined things. Then, when I was, I think 14 or 15, my church kicked out an awesome priest, one I loved because he was fun, and put in a, a Serbian Orthodox priest that stole basically all of the money from the church, uh, beat his wife in public, and beat his 4-year-old kid behind the altar because his 4-year-old kid accidentally dropped a bit of burning incense because he wanted the kid to handle burning incense. And of course, a 4-year-old's going to drop it. This broke my faith because of how bad he was and how corrupt he was. Because priests in the Orthodox Church hold a very high level of respect. They are mouthpiece of God. They are supposed to be nigh perfect and respectable. They will have human flaws, but they aren't supposed to be less moral than a 14-year-old.
Yeah, I'm with you on this so far. Sure.
Once I accepted that that was the fallibility there, and I began to apply it through, it just continuously fell apart. Like every strand that I pulled on, looking for something to be firm to hold on to, fell apart for me. Um, every piece has skeletons in their closet, from what I can tell. Even the ones I really like and think are good people have skeletons. Um, every uh, bit of miracle is eventually explained via science. So for me, I don't necessarily believe in God anymore because of that, because it seems to me that
Can
it's
I
now,
jump in and maybe help drive where you're going?
yes,
It sounds to me like this is essentially was a catalyst. You saw how bad this person who's supposed to be the head of the church is, who's supposed to be inspired by God and who's been lifted up by the church as a good person, not being a good person. So that led you to question other things within the doctrine and within the church itself to see if it was actually cohesive and made sense and actually followed pull the line. Don't just live what you preach. Essentially, put up or
yes,
shut up. Essentially, and because it didn't ruin your faith, but it caused you to question it, it was kind of a bit of a catalyst that then led you down a line of questioning that then eventually, after you exhausted what you could at the time, led you to other options.
Yes, that is very, very, very nearly what I was going for. Basically, the gist of it. But I didn't quite end up as a pure atheist going, oh, God doesn't exist, it's all natural, because there are still things that I can't explain through science. And there are things that happen which seem to defy science. I've basically come to a position where I don't necessarily think that there is an intelligence driving, mysticism or anything like that, but rather, as close as I can explain it, karma. I believe that we do things and we influence the random probability of the world in ways that we can't understand.
Yeah, I don't necessarily believe in karma per se, because karma is actually an actual belief that there's something out there that causes.
It sounds like he more meant you reap what you sow.
Yeah. I believe in it. I believe in an unguided type of like karma, such that I do think if you live by a certain way, you're more likely to have something come back to you, right? I will agree with that if that's what you. I believe that the term, like for example, like luck is used in epistemology, but it's not used in the way you would think it used. It's called epistemic luck. This happens to be the case, right? That's what the luck means. But there's also another word called synchronicity, which is something is very, very kind of similar to that kind of concept. That like you hear a word every so often, and then you hear a word, and then all of a sudden you start hearing the word more and more over again. That kind of phenomenon. There's a lot of phenomena that we attribute to a higher being. Because it's weird to think that these things do happen, and karma is one of those types of things that people would have probably attribute. Hey, this guy was a dick, but look what happened to him. He got screwed over. That's karma, right? But no, I agree with you saying as far as and by the way, serendipity was another good word. Serendipity is the way I would describe karma is more something more along the lines similar to serendipity. It's not really a guided thing. It's just happened to be fortuitous, but. The way you're describing your deconversion, the way you're describing coming out of theism is kind of very similar to most people's deconversions, right? And so what you need to do is kind of figure out what you want to be as called like your identifier, your moniker, your label is that's kind of what I help people with, because they say, hey, look at people have like weird argument. They were like, Steve tells me what I'm supposed to call myself. No, I don't. I'm like, if you want to know what that would be considered basically in a philosophical position, fine, because people like to have words that describe people pretty quickly so people know where you stand. If I say, hey, to a skeptic, that's going to mean something probably different to you than it is to Ozzy, right? Because skepticism is actually a school of thought dealing with knowledge. It like a Peronian skeptic.
Politics is a good example of this. If you say you're a Republican or you say you're a Democrat, people expect you to hold a certain set of values.
Yep.
Yeah.
But see, to me, the problem with those broad terms like Democrat or Republican, theist, atheist, is they're too broad.
Well, it's the values, not the nuance of what you do agree within the party. It's the values that you're looking for. So when somebody says that they're an atheist or an agnostic, what you're looking for is like a general whole of now you know how to approach the conversation and what you're dealing with. So that way, then you can, like if somebody says I'm a theist, that's really broad, but it still gives you an idea of what they're talking about. So now you can actually dive into the conversation to kind of understand where they're coming from. What they're
and it's you both mentioned that, and that's one of the arguments I say. Look, theism is a broad category, right? Because you have a lot of different things to be theist. You're Christian, you're Jewish, you're Muslim. Those are all under theism, right? So that's the umbrella. Mm-hmm. The complementary set to that, anything that is not a theist, would be not theist. Okay, they call it non-theism, not theist, right? So that is just as that's a big category too, because that's everything that's not a theist. Now, what the American atheists want to do is and atheist community of Austin, they want to take atheism to be synonymous with not theist. They want to have that umbrella They want to have the most inclusive groups people in that group as they can for political reasons, not for philosophical reasons. It's for political reasons. So they want us to assume every other position, atheism, agnosticism, theological cognitivism, agnosticism. They want to include everybody else for their own political agendas. So they assume all those. That loses fine structure. That loses all your what's called granularity, right? You don't have any fine granularity any longer. You have a homogenous group of people that are just under the same umbrella of, oh, they don't believe in God. That's really imprecise. That is really vague and nondescript as far as what your position. You want people to know what you believe. This is what I try to help people with. So you want to get down like what your actual beliefs are, because you're clearly not a theist any longer, right? So you're a non-theist. That we can deduce. No. Right? Okay.
Yep. I honestly don't have a term for this, so I always have to kind of explain it. I don't believe that there is a God. I don't believe that there is some central mind of the universe that created everything. I do believe that basically everything is random chance, but it's not completely random. It's not just chaos. It's the actions that we do basically create luck for us. Okay. Good people doing good things, get good rewards and stuff like that. But I have a very central thing in this also, is that it doesn't matter technically what you do. It matters why you do it. Mm-hmm. My key philosophy is that a person is only good when they do good without promise of reward or threat of punishment.
Like altruistic? Because it sounds like to me you're describing serendipity. Serendipity is basically the things that happen by chance, but usually in a good or fortuitous, beneficial way.
Well, not always, because it's if I save a person's life, but I only did it because I got paid, that's not a good or an evil act. It's just an act. I don't believe that will influence anything. If I saved a person's life because I saw they were in trouble and I just acted on it, and I didn't ask for a reward, didn't care about it, I just did it because I needed to do it, that's a good act. Mm-hmm. That will benefit you later on in life. You screw your friend over by sleeping with his girlfriend because you think she's hot, that's a bad act, and you're going to get something bad.
Not for the girlfriend. Oh, sorry. No, but I think you're leading into more moral theory though, and I think that's going to be a completely different topic, right? From the ontological question of God's existing, right? You went from one gear to over here. So I get what you're saying. I don't think there's a particular position for that. Maybe you're just you like to look on the bright side of things. It sounds
like you're trying to figure out your moral ethics and your
moral
and why you think those things are the way they are without using some kind of divine intervention.
Yeah.
Which is a
naturalism
thing you should do. You should do that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. But let's kind of go back to your ontological thing if you can.
There's no God. There's no spirits. There's no soul. Those things I don't believe existing. I don't believe when we die that there's anything waiting for us. It is, you live this life and you're done. The supernatural is basically just the unexplained reactions to morals and everyone's interconnectivity there. So maybe you could say that there is an overall human soul, but not an individual one. I am firmly in what most people would now call atheist, just judging by that. I do still believe that there are mystic things out there, but I believe they're mystic because we don't have any way of describing them, and I don't think science ever will.
Okay. So I'm gonna dive in for a second. What I think you're kind of describing is that you accept things that exist that are called brute facts. This is a basic thing for foundationalism. That there are things that we just have no way of ever knowing, called epistemic limitations. So these things are so forever out of our epistemic realm that we'll never be able to know about them. I believe this as well, by the way. Again, we could be wrong on these. These are just beliefs. But I think there probably is our brains are so limited that we couldn't even understand the complexity of the universe and understand to the such that if there is knowledge to be had out there, we could never ascertain it because we're just limited by too much, right? So I would call that a brute fact. There's brute facts that exist that don't satisfy principles, fits, or reason. They don't explain anything. They just are contingent facts. And I'm okay with that. I mean, that's just my position. That's foundationalism in a nutshell. You might have something similar if you're looking for like a worldview or an epistemic justification theory of your belief system, like coherentism or found herentism. There's a whole bunch, infinitism. There's a whole bunch you can choose, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. Although if you ask Sock Account, he loves coherentism and he'll die on that sword till the day he dies. But I just think it doesn't really matter which one you pick as long as you build a framework that's consistent from it. That's all. Does that kind of make sense?
Okay. It makes sense. And I'll actually probably ask you to DM me those later so
Sure.
I can take an actual look at them.
Now, by the way, I think you can jump from one to the other. I don't think you have to be beholden to one framework. If you read a paper called the Raft and the Pyramid and the Raft by Sosa, it's a very complicated paper. I only really get through the first 2 or 3 pages. And it's only like 5 pages long or something like that. Well, it's a little longer, but it gets to the point where I just it's like reading quantum mechanics, right? It's lost. But the first couple pages are very good. But he really explains the difference between foundationalism and coherentism as if you have a pyramid, you have a base, then you build upon that base, right? One belief after another.
Mm-hmm.
And the base are your properly basic beliefs or your brute facts. And then the coherentism would be more like a raft of reeds or logs or wood. And you can pull a plank out of a coherentist approach and you don't have the framework fall apart. You can replace them at will. But on a foundationalist approach, your properly basic beliefs are solid. You can't replace them. They're non-change. You can't change them out. Once you start with them, that's what you have to build from. I can send you all that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, now we went from moral theory to epistemic justifications. So I want to go back to ontology about your belief about God. Okay, so you believe there are no gods.
Yes.
Okay. Would you consider yourself a naturalist?
Define that, please.
A naturalist would believe that there's no supernatural causations or ontology to supernaturalism. Everything that exists is material, can be explained by natural causes. And by the way, I want people to notice. You notice the difference in discussion between somebody like Helios and myself than it was with Rick the other day? Rick Delano. You notice the difference? Yeah. By the way, she's got a light over her head. That looks cool. She's like...
Yeah, neither of you look like you stepped out of a Flintstones cartoon.
Yeah, you look like you're about to ascend into the heavens, though, with the way you have your light set up.
Did you watch the Delano
That's
thing the other day, Helios?
true.
I may
was
have,
bad.
but
You know what, Chess? You should do the opposite. You should be like, that's bullshit.
That's garbage.
but
What are you talking about?
no.
Bullshit.
Actually, the way that you just described it, no, I wouldn't be, because I do believe that there are supernatural things, just not intelligent supernatural things.
All right, so let's get into what supernatural would mean then. If you want to say everything that exists would be in the set of natural, if you're a naturalist, everything that can exist or does exist is in the set of all things that are natural. Anything that is not in that set would be considered to be supernatural in this regard, the way I'm positing it. So non-natural, right? We're going to call non-natural supernatural. So if you posit something that's not in the set of natural things, what would be something not in that set of natural things?
For a particular thing, it would be, well, it's hard to describe something that doesn't itself exist.
Well, like ghost would be something that people consider. Some people would say, well, not in the set of natural things. It has no ontology. It does not exist. It's non-natural. And I mean exist in the most broadest general sense, not,
Mhm.
I mean, so it doesn't have to have a concrete existence. It doesn't have to be reified.
See, for me, the area that I go to here is more along the lines of they cause things. Like the supernatural for me would be the spontaneous generation of an electron, an anti-electron in a vacuum of space and complete emptiness.
Okay. Why
We
would
do,
you call that supernatural though? That we understand virtual particles. We understand
yeah,
the mechanism behind that, the breaking of symmetry, the imparting of mass into the virtual particle, Hawking radiation. We understand that as naturalist. Are you saying that because we don't understand the exact, we don't know why it does it? The why is more philosophy, but are you saying that's supernatural?
because it's gone from non-existence to existence, even though it's incredibly small. Those things didn't exist prior to an instant, and 99.999% of the time they instantly cancel out and stop. But sometimes they don't.
Well, near a black hole
Yeah.
on
Well,
the event
yeah.
horizon
Does
boundary.
that
Yeah.
mean that you would consider? Now, I'm just looking to clarify. Would that mean that you consider the beginning of the universe would be considered supernatural then, by that definition?
Yes.
Okay.
Essentially,
Okay.
I believe the start of the universe was the most supernatural event in all of existence, and that the supernatural very, very rarely happens outside of that. Um, it
You know what? Hang on. I have a better word for you to use. I think I'm going to solve your problem right here and now. Instead of using the word supernatural, have you ever heard the word preternatural? Preternatural.
I am not familiar with that word.
Okay.
No.
Preternatural is beyond natural. It doesn't go so far to be supernatural, but it's beyond natural. Okay, so it is something that it would be outside the realm of nature, but doesn't go as far as supernaturalism. Here, I'll E-R-E preternaturalism. We put in the live chat for people. I think this word more describes your particular position, and it's defined as, and again, defined descriptively, meaning how it's basically used. Well, Merriam-Webster doesn't do me any good. Let me see. Surpassing what is normal or usual, surpassing what is normal or usual, extraordinary, transcending the natural or material order, and it does have supernatural, but they are not the same thing. There's a distinction between the two. But I think the word you're looking for is preternatural. I have a hard time with the R's. Preternatural. We might want to look into that because I think that's kind of more what you're looking for. Because like the Big Bang or something like that. You know.
Mm-hmm. But that would be as far as my definition of what supernatural or preternatural existence is. I wouldn't say that there are ghosts and stuff like that. I don't believe in those
Yeah.
things. Um, I don't believe in like the old tree spirits are going to come out and haunt us for taking out their forests or anything along those lines.
You're telling me that you don't believe in the great Deku tree?
Nope, not the Great Jakkuti, not Old Willow either.
Well, like I said, I think you should look into the word I gave you because I think it would avoid confusion. Because you start using the word
How could you
supernatural,
have had America without Grandma Willow?
you start using the word supernatural the way you're using it, you're just going to confuse people. Because you hear they hear supernatural, they're going to think ghosts, spirits, God, demons. They're going to think along those lines. So it's going to probably spend a lot more time trying to. If you just say, "Hey, I'm a preternaturalist. I think there are things beyond the natural," which is fine. I would probably agree with you. And then you could describe that, but that's up to you. I mean, but because again, the Big Bang to me cannot be supernatural because it's still in the realm of natural things that exist.
Steve,
But
real quick,
Yeah.
somebody's asking you to give us, if you guys can maybe clarify a little bit and give us an example of something that is supernatural, or whatever you said.
Preternatural.
Is that how that's pronounced?
I hate R's. You know, I have a hard time pronouncing it.
Preternatural?
Preternatural.
Preternatural? Preternatural. So if you could
You
give
know,
us an example
pronunciations
of,
are
like,
not my thing, right? I have a hard time pronouncing certain words.
No, yeah, I wasn't sure. I was
Yeah.
trying to read it.
I know what the word. This is the thing. I know. I have a decent account. I know what the words kind of are used. I just can't say half of them. Same thing I had running the problem the other night with Rick Delano. Right. I knew what he was talking about. He was talking about Aristotelian forms, which and there's a Latin term for that. And it's Ousia.
Reptilian
I don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's pronounced Uwasa, although it starts with an O.
Oh.
But it's pronounced Uwasa. And
so
I don't
like
use that
those...
term very much. I just read it, right? I read the literature, but I don't hear the term used that often. And so I knew what he was talking about because I do read, but these are fake, by the way. Whatever.
Per dictionary.com, it's pronounced preternatural.
Preternatural. That's still hard. You can tell with words with R. I choke. This is why I took speech theory for many years. But anyways, that's the word that I think you're trying to look for. Yeah. Everybody learns something new every day. But I think that supernatural, again, I let people define what they want by supernatural because I don't have a real clear-cut, definitive usage of the term supernatural. People use it in different ways. So when somebody supernatural, I let them describe it.
Ousia.
No, it's not. It's no. I don't think you pronounce the O. It's pronounced the U first.
Or Ousia.
Ousia is pronounced. Yeah. Ousia. Yeah.
Ousia.
Yeah.
Like boomer.
Yeah. Ousia is how it's pronounced. Ousia. Yeah. And again, but I hadn't really heard the pronounced. I've only read about the word. I don't think I've ever. But I knew what he was referring to, but I just couldn't say the word. Although I know now it's Ousia. Yeah. How many people know that though? How many people would have talking to Rick Delano would know what Ousia is though? Come on. And he has some other words too. There's some similar words that.
Did he know what it meant, or
was
he using it incorrectly?
He knew it. No, he's a Thomist. He reads Thomism, and he reads Aristotelian stuff. So he knows the things about quantum mechanics. I mean, nothing he said about the actual data was too far off. It's just his conclusions are bizarre. Very bizarre. But anyways, sorry, Helios.
No, that's fine. I'll let you speak as much as you want. I'm not used to being on live chat like this.
You're doing great.
Thank you.
Is this your first time?
This is my first time on a live chat like this. Back when I was more active in my church and in my school, 14 or 15, they put me on public access a few times, but
this is your first time on YouTube.
If I tell you an embarrassing story about my church time, will it make you feel better?
Sure.
Does it involve popping cherries like it is his?
When I was in church, I actually choreographed and set up and ran the entire dance segment for the Christmas pageant thing that went down. So that was fun.
Did it turn out good at least?
I thought it did at the time.
I forgot my lines. I forgot my lines in The Hobbit.
They did a video that somebody else choreographed a video of, and that video probably still exists.
I was Gollum in The Hobbit in elementary school, and I forgot some of my lines. Although it came, it was fine. I was like, what? Fifth grade? I don't know. Fourth grade? Fifth, sixth? I don't know. But my precious ring, my pretty. Oh.
Did you just say my princess ring?
My pretty ring. Pretty.
He did say, he tried to say precious, but it kind of glitched a bit.
My precious. Don't take my precious ring. All right, so back.
What kind of problems can Jesus solve? Can he solve for X is the real question.
So you still don't consider yourself a naturalist then?
Just by the definition of what you said, naturalist.
I'm not. I'm not a naturalist,
right.
So I'm not trying to pigeonhole you. I'm not a naturalist either.
Yeah, I don't quite meet that definition because I do still allow for some things outside of nature. It's just my things that come from outside of nature are generally events that started massive things like the ignition of the sun, the beginning of a planet. I believe that those are supernatural events because the things that bind them together have to begin from nowhere.
Okay. Yeah, a naturalist though would basically say that the only thing that can be is natural, so you don't fall in that category. So you don't exclude the possibility of ghosts and goblins or demons and anything like that. Like, or how about just gods? Do you say that gods cannot exist?
Did you just ask him if he excludes me?
Yes, you caught that.
Hold on.
I wanted to see. Yeah, she caught that. She could be a figment of your imagination. Yeah.
Gods are a hard sell for me because gods to me are the definitions that people put for natural events beforehand. A volcano blowing up became Vulcan. The sun was Helios. So gods to me are just natural events that people, until we knew better, gave names.
Sure, but is there a supernatural god that can defy? Okay, do you believe there's a supernatural being that can prescriptively change the laws of reality at will?
No.
Okay, that's that's just my. By the way, that's my stipulative usage of the term. People don't have to accept that. But when I use the term God in any kind of setting like this, I try to at least give some kind of stipulative definitions that I use. And one of which is, to me, a God would be something along the lines of a metaphysical being that has intelligence or has free agency and can prescriptively change reality. I would consider that being a deity or God for all practical purposes. And if people disagree with that, that's fine. But again, this is a stipulative usage that I have. Like Arn has a stipulative usage for God, right? An anthropomorphic, an anthropomorphic being. Then I don't remember what else he has.
Yeah, God can be a very, very vague term. Some people will just say that, oh well, God is love. Well, then you're just using now it's just a semantic argument where you're using a word substituting for another word. So when you're having these kind of discussions, it's usually best to find out what the other person means when they're talking about God, if you're having a discussion.
Yeah, even that argument has weird things because the type of love that they're talking about, which goes back to what's called scholasticism, was called agape love. The term agape type of a different type of love than when people just say God is love, right? That's another word for you guys today, agape. Boy, this is like educational today, isn't it? What's wrong with this channel? People have been saying they wanted new stuff, or they wanted more stuff on this stuff. So.
Oh yeah, we try to kind of do a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, a little bit of column C.
We're blender.
Mondays is just not the place usually.
All right, so you're not a naturalist. I would say you're probably a methodological naturalist, though. That's what I am. That's what Matt Delahanty is. That's the most common. Methodological naturalism just basically says that in the realm of science, for example, we at least will try to find a scientific explanation, a natural explanation for natural phenomenon. And that sounds like what you're trying to do because you're talking about volcanoes and Vulcan and things of that nature. That falls under methodological naturalism as far as you don't hold the belief that everything has to be natural, but in the realm of science, in the realm of observations, what we see to find an explanation for something, then we want to find a natural explanation. When we see lightning, we go, hey, hammer, Thor.
Well, it's a little bit God of the Gapsy.
It's not a God of the Gaps because God of the Gaps is when you're saying we don't have an explanation for something, especially in science. We're going to fill that gap in with God.
That's what those people were.
I thought you were talking about. I was doing it.
Yeah, they didn't know what. Yeah, sorry, maybe I was unclear. Mm-hmm. They didn't know what the volcano was, so they.
Yeah. That would be gods of the Gaps. Yeah.
But I mean, I might argue that Helios is a little bit doing the same thing because he's saying that these things pop out of non-existence, which isn't a good enough explanation, so he's calling it supernatural. Well, if we find out that there's some kind of explanation for this down the line, well, does that then remove what you would be then considering a supernatural event?
Okay. And it's very possible, and that's a very fair argument to make. It could just be that it's beyond my imagination, thus I'm attributing that. That's something that I can't necessarily correct for.
Sure.
Because there may eventually be a day where we become so advanced that everything is actually knowable.
We are the gods.
We have
There may
become
become
the
a
gods.
day where even the current hypothetical limit that you can't know everything all at once turns out to be false, where you can know, the speed, the velocity, and the exact position of a particle all at the same time. And we just don't have the technology now. So there's no argument that I could make which won't inherently be a God of the gaps argument if I'm basing it on it not being able to be proven now.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really odd thing because, like, for example, like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, not the fact that it's experimentally confirmed, but it's mathematically proven to be the case. There's certain things in mathematics that they've proven that you can't have local hidden variables that satisfy the Bell inequality. And so when you talk about mathematical proofs, I don't think there's any bit of knowledge that can change that. There's nothing we can know to say 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 in mathematics. Right? That is just something that cannot be any other way. It's a metaphysical necessity. So I kind of differ with you on that. I don't think it's a lacking of knowledge. It's actually been shown, proven, actually literally proven to be the case. And so once you have something like that, it's not a matter of epistemic uncertainty. Now, you can get into the whole Descartes thing and the Descartes demon and brain in a vat and things of that nature.
Never go full solipsism.
Yeah, once you start getting into that gets into some really bizarre stuff because one of the
I'm gonna make that into a shirt one day.
What's that?
Never go full solipsism.
Never. Yeah, well, you'd be living inside your head. There's a lot of weird things that happen when what's something called the epistemic closure principle.
All of us are living inside our head, Steve. We're all brains.
Well, that by the way, that's actually what Rick Delano's argument kind of is that we live in our own privatized world of reality, which is a perception of what we see from base reality or naive
I meant
realism.
physically.
Yeah.
I meant physically.
Okay.
Just
But,
imagining her that shirt being literally just a brain in a jar with a thought bubble.
Yeah. The thinking
Never
about
go
self.
full solipsism.
Yeah, there's infinite. What you should have is you should have like Kennedy in space, dead Kennedy in space, and have him thinking about himself. It's like this infinite regression of being inside his head, right?
Though underneath it just says never go
Never
full
go
solipsism.
full solipsism, exactly. But yeah, the epistemic closure principle is if you know P and P knows Q, then you know Q is it's a closure of epistemic chain of causalities or chain. But in the brain of the vat, that you can actually deny that, and so you can actually say that we're not a brain of the vat, and it goes to what's Novak had an argument on it called the I think the name of the argument is I have two hands, but I'm not sure, but yeah, I have two hands. Basically, it goes something like this: I have one hand, I have another. Wait, what's his argument? I have one hand, I have another. Therefore, there are two hands in reality because it's two separate propositions.
I have an apple.
Yeah, so because it's not that I exist, therefore I think, therefore I am. It's not something like that. It's I have one hand, I have another hand. There are two things that exist in reality. Therefore, reality is external to the mind. Something along those lines. I was going to have a discussion with Ozzy on this particular argument one time because it's weird and very nuanced, but we never got into it. But yeah, go look up. I think it's Novak is it Novak that has an argument?
I think I agree with something Riley said. They said that we can never. It's unlikely that we'll ever be able to know everything.
Here's one.
I agree with them. I agree with them because I don't think you would ever. How would you ever know if you didn't know something?
Yeah, let me correct that.
You don't know what you don't know.
It was actually it was G.E. Moore's argument. My bad. That's why Ozzy needs to be here for this kind of stuff. It was G.E. Moore's argument. Novak is the one that I think argued against it by using a rejection of the epistemic closure principle. I'll put it in the live chat there if you want to know. Here's one hand, here's another. So it goes, here is one hand, and here is another. There are at least two external objects in the world, therefore an external world exists. But anyways, it's a sideline there. Because there's no way to know whether if reality is external to the mind or internal to the mind. Because any evidence for one is evidence for the other. G. Moore came up with that argument to show there is possibly a way to describe reality such that we know that it's outside of our mind rather than just being internal. Boy, did we go off the ontological question of God.
Hey guys, don't forget to like and share and hit that subscribe button. Also hit the little bell if you want to see more. Yeah!
Is anybody still watching? We went so many different tangents.
We got 140 people in here. What are you talking about?
Don't tell me that number.
Yeah, you did that. Now he's gonna. So you're a methodological naturalist now,
Sorry.
but you call yourself an atheist because you do believe there are no gods, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So you would be called a philosophical atheist, which is atheism in philosophy. Now, I don't know if you want to get into it, but because we would talk about agnosticism and atheism, but you do agree that the most normative use of the term atheism, the way it's commonly understood in philosophy, for many different reasons, is the belief that God does not exist, right?
Yes.
Okay. Because that, by the way, I got to tell you, I'm amazed how many people have come around on that. Hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of atheists have changed their minds because they were so indoctrinated by American atheists and atheist experience to believe that atheism is only a lack of belief, and now they're finding out
Hey,
they
Steve,
were
you got a
misled.
source for that number?
Yeah, do I have source? I've got source. I do actually, but I'm not going to show you every message that I get. But I do. I literally do. Yes, go ahead.
I have to question why that ever became popular, because that definition of atheism isn't useful.
Right, but the argument goes to utility. That if you could include as many people under the auspice of the group term, right, atheist for American atheist, you have more political power.
Yeah, it depends on what your goal is, right?
Yeah.
If the goal isn't to actually explain your position, and if the goal isn't actually to have a discussion, or your goal isn't based in philosophy, then it doesn't really matter, right? The definition isn't going to be useful to you no matter what the definition is. So the definition that they're using is something that is simple, it's easy to latch onto, and it's easy to pick up somebody who is dogmatic in thinking and transfer them to a different dogma than it is to get them out of dogmatic thinking and teaching them how to. It's a quality over quantity argument. So they're choosing to garner as many people as they can to have as much influence as they can, because the ends would justify the means to them in that case, because then they can make any changes that they want within a government and within a society, versus taking somebody and saying, okay, listen, we're going to work through this one step at a time, and it's more nuanced and there's a lot more to it than that, because it's harder for people to latch onto in small snippets.
Yeah, I think what we're putting it. I think what they do is they know the theist mindset can be very, very ideological, right? Very, very fastidious in their beliefs and very dogmatic. And I think they use that to their advantage, because the atheists that try to deconvert theists by using these types of techniques, by saying, well, you just don't believe in God, you're an atheist, to try to get them in the political umbrella, I think they're being just as generous as a theist. And I think
there's actually a reason why it's kind of a little bit okay to approach an argument that way, because now you're forcing the other person to think about something they maybe haven't thought about before.
What do you mean?
So, like, if you make a claim that says, "Oh, God exists," and I say, "Well, how do you know that?" I'm forcing you to think about and explain to me your justification that you may not have.
Well, no, actually, I disagree with you, because what you did with you changed your predicate. By the person saying, "I believe God exists," and now you're saying, "How do you know that?" They're not claiming knowledge, right? You're asking.
Well, they're saying, "I believe." Yeah, but when I'm talking,
you would ask, well, the question should be, "Why do you believe that?" Not, "How do you know that?" Okay,
sure, yeah.
Okay, Site 10, Bernicate.
Yeah, if you want to rephrase the question, the point is that it gets the same result. The result is that they're forced to think about their position, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody says that I believe you're holding an apple behind your back, and I say, well, how do you know that, or why do you think that? They have to then come up with reasoning as to why, and it's some automatic response to defend their position, which forces them to actually put the effort in to defend their position, when somebody who's indoctrinated may not have already considered that. There are reasons for approaching discussions this way. It's just not the way. The only real issue that I have with this is that they force it into places that it shouldn't be. So they force it into philosophy, or they tell somebody where they're wrong when they're actually not. Now, what they should say, instead of, oh, hey, you're wrong, is they should say, oh, that's not what we discuss here. This is the term and how we're using it.
Well, I think they're moving to that. I think they've started to do that a little bit more.
That would be a lot better. Good.
Well, the American Atheist hasn't, but I think Atheist Experience has a little bit. I think they still have some issues, of course. I mean, they do. But going back to what you said about the person saying they believe, like if Helios says, I believe there are no gods. it's fine to ask for their justification for why you don't believe that, right? If they want to have a discussion with you, especially if they want to convince you. It's called the burden of persuasion. But with like the Show the Atheist experience, they don't want callers to call in and they don't want to have to justify their position all the time. And I get that. It's not what the show's for. I don't begrudge them for that at all. It would be very, very much a waste of time. But what I do have the problem is that they don't seem to understand, and this is where Matt Dillahunty and Atheist Experience and R and a few other people on that side constantly belittle me, even though there's a huge amount of standing for this. I mean, this is not something I just pulled out of my ass. This is something that I've talked about with multiple people, reading multiple papers and asking the people who wrote these papers, like Dr. Malik, who wrote a paper on the epistemic justifications of atheism called Defining Atheism and the Burden of Proof. And he thought I did a really good job. He was very thrilled that I did an analysis on that particular paper of his, and he actually pointed it out on Facebook. But the argument is goes along the lines of, if you withhold affirmation, that is a position, right? You have to have reasons to withhold an affirmation. Now, they don't believe that. They think that that's bullshit. They don't think you don't have to have a burden of proof to say that I don't believe. But I would give them arguments why I think that's not the case, and they've never once addressed my actual arguments. All they've said is Steve's wrong. I have never once heard anybody on that side give me a reason why my argument doesn't hold. And the reasons I can give examples. If I say Helios, do you believe that I exist? Which I put a blog on this too. But if I say, do you believe I exist? And Helios says, Steve, I don't believe that you exist. That is a pretty irrational position, right? That's not normative. I want to know what justification you have for denying that belief, right? There has to be a justificatory reason to make it rational why you're withholding affirmation of my existence. That most people will agree with. They'll agree that probably, yeah, it's pretty weird that you don't think Steve exists. Why do you think that? They'll want to know more information about that. But if you change that word Steve to God, and by the way, somebody's out there going, Steve's comparing himself to God, he's a narcissist. Watch, it'll happen. But if you say, hey, why don't you believe in God? And if somebody says, well, I don't believe in God, but I have no justification for it. You see the issue? It's the same thing. Well, why are you withholding affirmation? And it's not hard to discharge that. Well, I don't believe in God because, if you look at all the different arguments against God for the evidential problem of evil, the logical problem of evil, divine hiddenness, moral epistemological problems with God, you know what? They pretty much probabilistically, the likelihood of a God is pretty small. Therefore, I don't believe it. Boom! That's it. That's all you got to do. And you're justified, in my opinion. Yes, you're muted.
Chesh, what are you
doing? By the way, does that make sense to you, Helios?
Don't worry about it. That's for anybody who knows how to read lips in the audience. I know there's at least one person that may or may not be here that may or may not watch later. They'll get it.
First of all, are you talking dirty, even lip sync? Because I'll get. And I know, by the way, there is actually somebody in our community that is a little bit hard of hearing. We were talking about trying to do some closed captioning stuff through this software we have now available to us through Suites. So.
Yep.
We might want to do that for the hard of hearing people. I think that'd be awesome. But so that does make sense to you, Helios, then.
Yeah, and I get that, and that makes sense to me. But it also brings a question to my mind.
Sure.
Is it then? Could then the nonsensical argument be useful still? People coming out don't have the knowledge base that we have. They don't know these terms. They don't know that. When you're religion, you don't really study this stuff.
Yeah, that's true. They should, though, you would think. And by the way, a good narcissist would say, they wouldn't say I am God. They would say God is Steve. That's a good narcissist. Go ahead.
When I was
taking my own hold here. I'm just going
of my own religion on my path, I began having to define myself, and I latched on originally to just the term agnostic, a very crappy understanding of it, based off of just what I read on the Webster Dictionary.
Yeah, we all know about using a general colloquial dictionary for in-field discussions. How well that works for the creationist. Yeah, that works really well, right? Yeah. Evolution is just a change. Species are kind.
Yeah, but that helped
There's
me.
a guess.
But that helped me break out. So, could there not then be an argument that places that use those definitions to help people break away from religion are still useful? they may be using the terms incorrectly or, incompletely. Um, but as long as it's helping people get a better understanding and get out, you can fix the knowledge base later. You can redefine and uh,
Yeah,
That's
improve.
yeah.
again, that's a consequentialist argument, and it goes to utility,
Well,
and it also to me is an ethical consideration. It's like we're okay to lie a little bit in order to get people to understand later. That's something I would
I've
say a
actually
theist would do, right?
I've explained this to Steve a couple of times, where you've got the atheist experience because it's such a lot of it's something that like a lot of first timers will have seen, and so whereas they're just like, oh, here's like a little triangle sandwich, you can just try the sandwich, just take a couple of nibbles before you like go dive into it. Meanwhile, Steve is like got a sub sandwich he's just trying to shove down people's throats. The thing is that you've got there's steps, right? And having the atheist experience as a first step is great, and that's fine, and there's nothing wrong with that, provided that they're not telling people that they're wrong,
Right.
or that they're giving people incorrect information about whatever it is that they want to say. So they can the thing is they can do both. They can be
Mhm.
that front line, and they can be the first step for people to understanding, and then allow them to branch out. But it shouldn't be a fight to have to branch out. You shouldn't have to
They
unlearn to learn more.
they would be so much more inclusive, and I think they would have much more of a following if they would say, our stuff
And they
is.
wouldn't alien people, yeah.
Yeah, they'd be like,
Mhm.
hey, we're giving you guys some very basic stuff, but if you really want to dive into this, hey, go talk to the philosophers.
Yep.
Them saying that I'm wrong does them no service, because everybody that does know these topics, these philosophers, they're not agreeing with them, right? I don't know any philosopher that agrees with Matt Dillahunty on any of this. None, not one. If you know of any, please send them my way. I will love to have a conversation with them. Now, Aaron said he knows one. He said, yeah, there's a philosopher that disagrees with you on that. Okay, who is that? And you know what? He never gave me the name. He wouldn't give me the name, right? And by the way, don't give me a name of a dead person. Okay, that doesn't do me any good. Or don't give me a name of if you give me a name of a person who's alive, maybe I can contact. But again, I don't know of any, and I do read a lot of the literature. I do know a lot of the philosophers. But again, they make it out to try to stigmatize me, saying, "Oh, look, Steve's just completely wrong." But I have the same position as Malpass, same position as Ozzy, same position as Opie, same position as Dr. Paul Draper, who wrote Stanford Encyclopedia, Dr. Dr. McCormick, who wrote Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I have the same positions as most of them. Well, McCormick I differ a little bit, but for the most part, if they're saying I'm wrong, they're saying all those people are wrong too. Which, by the way, they do, but they don't ever explicitly go after them. By the way,
Steve's just an easy
Oh,
target.
I am. I mean, yeah. Well,
well,
I don't have the letters in back of my name to kind of bolster my information, which I get, and I don't claim to be anything but a layman. But I do claim that the information I give is validatable. You can actually go read it for yourself and go learn about it. And that's why a lot of people have. This is why I have a bigger following than I ever have, is because people that did take the time to go learn it said, shit, you know what? Yeah, you know what? Matt is and Aaron, maybe they aren't correct on this. And they're not the paradigms, people had propped them up to be in that regard. But they do a great job of getting people, to think initially. I mean, I begrudge them nothing.
well, I wasn't thinking so much lying or say are misleading people, but just to put this in analogy form, maybe the term agnostic atheist is like the Betty Crocker cake box cake mix of philosophy. It's the thing that introduces you to it. You just add an
But what
egg
does
and
it really
some
tell
water.
somebody though? I mean,
Well, no, I see what he's saying. He's saying it's easy to get into if you're ever making your first cake. If you've never made a cake before, you take a box cake. It's got clear instructions on it. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. But then when you
okay.
get into more advanced,
My
but the
my
thing
argument is
like
this.
you don't have a random. It's not telling you to throw a random asparagus in there
Yeah,
instead of an egg,
my
which
counter
is what
argument
atheist
would
experience is currently doing.
my counter argument would be this. Maybe this is my military thinking, but my counter argument is this: if you don't learn the basic foundations of things first, it's confusing later on. You don't start with a solid foundation conceptually. I had that mistake happen to me when it came to certain things like mathematics. I had to kind of learn mathematics because I didn't learn growing up mathematics as well as I should have. Algebra was hard for me in like 7th grade, 8th grade whenever I started learning it. It was not easy for me, and then I had retrained myself in the military to really think about mathematics in a very, very different light. Kiwasa, 10,001, Helios. having dabbled in activism myself, when people find out later the explanation, quote, may not have been totally correct, they turn heel. Pragmatically speaking, it is not a good method, and I agree with him on that wholeheartedly. I don't. There's okay. I will go on a limb, and I'll meet you guys both in the middle. There is a type of methodological approach and pedagogical approach in education called holi- heuristics, a heuristical approach. So a heuristic approach is something along the lines of saying, hey, this may not be the exact way it is, but we're going to explain it this way in order for you to get a basic understanding of it. Well, you'll learn the details later. That's fine. For example, the Bohr model of the atom, the hydrogen atom, right? You've all seen it. Electrons going around the nucleus, protons in the middle. Yeah, we know that's not what it is. We know that model's completely bullshit, right? But it's just a heuristic approach where people can learn things and basically try to understand it. But even in college or in military, they'll tell you, you may not understand this at this junction. Accept it. This is a way to try to understand it, and then you'll learn more deeper methods later on. Calc is the same way. You don't learn the advanced things of calc first semester, right? You just don't. You say this is the way it is, but you don't derive a lot of that stuff until later on.
I will slightly disagree with you there with calculus, and I'm a very math heavy person. I slept through calculus and scored A's. I love
Oh
that.
man.
I want your brain then.
Now.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so when you start doing mathematical proofs using real analytics for why we have like something along the lines of like why for example, why is there not closure in the in integers for z? Why is that considered to be a field, not a ring? Because of that stuff is defined later on, right? You don't get into that in initial calculus, or why
Yes.
a differential is what it is. What actually does it entail?
Well, let him answer,
Sorry.
Steve.
Steve, do you remember the equation for the differentials? How to actually calculate them out?
Yeah, function f prime is equal to x plus h plus delta. No, f of x. Oh, sorry. Parenthetical f x plus h minus f of x over delta h.
I was talking more about the actual how to take the differential.
Well, yeah, you're taking a secant line of a circle.
The negative 4ac plus or minus the square
Oh, you're talking about
root
quadratic.
of-
You're talking about a quadratic equation. That's not a
Yeah,
differential.
No, it's how you take the differential from.
Yeah, and by the way, I meant integers.
But
sorry, I have to correct this. Integers is a ring, but not a field. I wanted to correct that for Landon out there. He's going to flip his mind. Integers are a ring, not a field. Reals are a field. I'm sorry.
doing that equation for just taking the differential for x squared, the most simple differential out there, is it takes a page. It takes a page, and it's long, and it's complicated, and it's annoying. I hate it.
Well, I
The
mean,
shortcut-
you talk about the power rule.
Yeah,
Well, the
the
power rule
shortcut for that is just drop it down.
you just drop. Yeah, you subtract.
power.
Okay, well, you talk about different things. Power rule is
Yeah.
when you take the exponent, you minus one, you make it the coefficient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you learn how to do the base stuff, which is just really complex arithmetic. In all honesty, once you break it down to its most simple components, and then you learn these tricks that they aren't actually real mathematics, but they work.
Why didn't you teach me that in the first place?
Yes.
Well, but here's the thing. The power rule is something that you do learn to use, right? If I say, what's the derivative of x squared? Okay, the exponent is 2. 2 minus 1 is 1. 2 is now the coefficient. So it's not a different. By the way, a differential is actually the with respect to x, but the power rule when you're taking a derivative, right? The derivative is a very simple thing to do when you have just something like x squared, use 2x. But why the power rule works is complicated. You don't learn that first semester.
I think you run into a different problem when you're taking what, going back a little bit and taking what the atheist experience is doing, because some of the stuff they do teach or they do tell people is incorrect,
Yes.
then these people who are dogmatic are going to remain being dogmatic, and now they're going to be dogmatically wrong about something else. And
see,
if
that's
they
what you
do, and
solution
spreading information incorrectly themselves. But on top of that, now if they ever do want to correct themselves, or they ever do try to advance and learn, they basically have to eat. They've stuck their foot in their mouth.
Yes.
And see, that's one thing that you should never do. You shouldn't be lying to people or misleading them or telling them things that are false. You should be very clear. We may be using this term, but this term is vague, not efficient, or not necessarily 100% correct. You should be
Well, that's fine. That's the whole. That's
upfront and honest.
Yeah,
what I said, right.
if they're clear about if
They
they say,
don't.
hey, listen, this is the way we're using it for the purposes of our show, and we're not discussing this part of it. However, if you want to find those resources, here they are on our website or whatever. That would be totally fine.
I think they're doing more of that now. By the way, I put the formula.
Yeah.
It's f of x equals the limit of h goes to 0, f function x plus h minus f of x over h. That's the fundamental theorem of first principles of calculus. That's first principles. By the way, I did a video on that particular formula. So if you want to be explained why that formula actually is first principles, then you can go to my channel here, and I have a calc video on that explaining that. But they're getting away from being as rigid, I think, because of the arguments people throwing at them, because they're sick of tired of people going, hey, what about this? And they're running arguments that I've said. And Matt Dillahunty even said to Anthony Magnabosco, he doesn't accept agnostic atheism in the lack of belief position. He thinks it's nonsensical. And he says even he disagrees with Iron Chariot's wiki on that. So he is able to change his mind. So I don't think he's being rigid on, for any other reason than he just, for some reason, doesn't want to accept certain things. Because I've seen him be, I think I've seen him change his mind, right? So he's not intransigent.
I've never quite bought 100% into that lack of belief statement, because you always inherently have a belief in something, even if you refuse to acknowledge that belief.
Well, the problem that you run into is if you don't believe God exists, it's pretty much because of one of two possible reasons. You either believe the negation, or you have no position either way. So if I say I do not believe in God, you can't tell me which one of the positions I hold. It's ambiguous. But if I say I don't believe in God because I believe gods are bullshit, or I don't believe in God because I think gods don't exist, then you know why I don't believe in God. Or I can say I don't believe in God because I have no position either way on the topic. I'm agnostic. Now you know my position there. It de-ambiguates. And that's my big whole issue when it comes to these topics, is the way I'm using these terms de-ambiguates the terminology to where it actually makes sense to somebody when you want to convey a very specific position. Because if you just say I lack a belief, that doesn't tell anybody anything. You could be a myriad of positions and still lack a belief. An apatheist lacks a belief, so what? That doesn't tell anybody anything, what it is when you're saying you lack a belief. I want to know what your beliefs are. Well, I believe gods don't exist. Okay, so you lack a belief because you think gods don't exist. You think they're bullshit. That is why the atheists have adopted the stronger positions, or at least the stronger usage of the terminology, have become much, in my opinion, much better at debating and having these discussions with theists, because
it makes for a more interesting discussion when you actually have a position.
Right. And having a non-position, okay, whatever, But if I say, hey, Helios, you don't believe Steve exists, okay, I kind of want to have a discussion on that, right? I want to know why you don't believe that I exist. Why is it any different when it comes to God? Why do people give them a pass and say, oh, you don't believe God exists? Okay, whatever. You have no onus. You have no justification. Somebody explain to me the difference, because I don't understand. I really am not trying to be a dick on this or a pedant. I don't understand what the difference is. If you say I don't believe something, how is it you think that you don't have a burden of proof on or justification, same thing, of why you withhold affirmation? Because everything I've read in the literature agrees with that. Even Michael Martin, Dr. Martin, who is somebody who actually advocates negative atheism, he even agrees with that. He thinks if you hold a negative atheism, which is, you don't believe God exists, you have to have a reason. I don't know any philosopher that I've talked to that doesn't agree with that so far. But of course, Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Roth thinks they think that's bad shit.
Philosophy is also intimidating it does have a lot of terms, and like the terms aren't necessarily overly complicated once, like the concepts usually, at least at this level, aren't too
It's the
complicated,
hardest
but
subject I've ever
it
heard,
takes a
ever studied.
yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, it takes a lot of time to get used to the jargon.
Yeah, it's very. I think philosophy is harder than physics.
I'm still not caught up on all of them.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I definitely think philosophy is the hardest subject in the world. It's
Oh yeah,
very,
I'm
very
not saying
difficult.
it's not difficult. I'm just like at this level, it's very intimidating, even though the concepts that you're talking about when you're referring to atheism, agnosticism, etc., and naturalism aren't complicated concepts once you understand what the terms mean.
But the deep stuff, the real stuff that requires some really cognitive values to think of. Oh my God, this. Yeah, you can sit there and
sent me an encyclopedia once, and I was just like,
why do you think these people get into existential quandaries and stuff like that? It's like, wow, do I exist? I don't. What the hell? It's hard. You can lay awake at night. Why do you these people have existential crisis when they start learning about philosophy? You know, it's like I'm sure a psych student. I'm watching Chicago Med, and there's a psych student on there, and once she starts getting into psych, she's diagnosing everybody, right? She just thinks she's wondering about her own psychology, and she's just, am I mental this or that? It's just that's the way it works in philosophy too. It's like you're trying to formulate your own positions, and most of them have tensions with each other. So I'm like, this makes sense, but this makes sense too, and they're mutually exclusive. Oh, wait, that was dirty. Was that dirty?
That's how two men have sex.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Helios, I'm
That's
not flirting with you, but if I was,
You know what? I'll take it.
I'm flirting with you.
yeah, just
I'll take that.
Hey, yeah, right. Hey, you're in the middle of both of us. Dream come true, right?
I thought my dream was being between Cheshire and Reds.
Make sure you're facing towards me.
Yeah, by the way, there's a lot of room between Cheshire and Reds. She's like this, and he's like this. There's a lot. Yeah, so they would make lousy bookends.
I am 100% certain that Cheshire is the one that does the insertion in that relationship.
I wouldn't use that term.
If I am in a relationship, nobody's wearing any pants.
Yeah, I don't imagine Cheshire in any kind of actual relationship. If that was the case. It would not be conventional, to say the least, if that ever would happen.
I'm not relationship material.
Yeah, I think Reds would have a lot more to be concerned about than most people if that was the case.
Do we want to go into some questions?
Yeah, sure, bring it on.
Okay, so Fact-Based Living said, I want to know why it's unacceptable if the usage of the words changes. Just because old-time philosophers wanted to use it one way doesn't, to me, mean I can't use it differently.
And here's the answer. You can use a word any way you want. And words do change in general parlance, but, you're talking about like a scientific word, like let's say the word evolution. The evolution is generally understood in biology to be the change of allelic frequency in any given population from one species to the next species. The change of allelic frequency in any given population from one species to another over time, from next generation, from one generation to the next. That's generally how it's understood. So they could change that definition, sure, in science, right? But the average person doesn't make that determination. Right? They can't say, hey, we're going to change evolution. Just means change, right? Or theory is a well-substantiated body of evidence that's been confirmed repeatedly through observation and experimentation. That is an accepted definition of theory, right? That's a working definition that they have in science. The average creationist can't change that. They can't just say theories guess. And this is what I see what atheists do. They try to change something. They try to take something that's well-established and has reasons why it's well established that way. There's reasons why evolution is described the way it is. There's reasons why theory is described the way it is. So they can't take a word and just own it. Nobody owns a word. They can use it stipulatively in their group, absolutely. But if they do that, they do have to answer the questions, I think, of, well, how do you avoid things like logical ambiguities? How do you avoid things like category errors? They don't bother answering those questions. They just shrug them off, or they say, whatever, no big deal. I'm like, so you're okay with having ambiguity in the system, and you're okay with having potentially logical contradictions or category errors, to say the least. Those are undeniable. I can show there's category errors. But they're like, that only applies in philosophy. Well, so you're taking logic and you're taking set theory and you're just applying it where you want. That's just not my idea of critical thinking. So it works against them, but they could do it. Does a good answer? Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. I
always ask that question because I want to make sure people do think it makes sense or not.
It makes sense to me. I would say, though, that you can use a word however you want. Honestly, you can always use a word however you want as long as you're consistent. Mm-hmm. And if you're using it in a way that is outside of the current norm for that word, the current understanding of it, you need to define it when you use it that way. And then you need to stick to that usage. You can't jump back and forth, because otherwise all you're doing is trying to mislead people.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine, but you can't tell the academics how a word is used in field, right? And what I do
if
is
you're speaking in that
don't
field,
tell other people that they're incorrect in a system.
Right, thank you. And so here's my argument. When I tell people how these words are used normatively in the field, why am I getting pushback from Aaron and Matt and the lack-theist acolytes, right? Why do they give me so much pushback on that? Because everybody's been telling them Steve's not wrong on this. I tagged in Sisyphus Redeemed the other day. A friend of mine, Dr. Garrett Merriam, great guy. He was on the show not too long ago, and I've known him for a while. Been listening to his stuff for like 7 years. But he came in and he was like, "Yeah, Steve, your citations are make a good argument that this is how it's used normatively in field." And I'm like, okay, so what is their argument that it isn't normatively used in field? I've never seen any argument.
There's a follow-up question that
Sure.
David Thompson just asked, but isn't that what science did with theory? Science co-opted the word, original meaning wasn't what science uses it as.
Well, there's something called synchronic versus diachronic, and a synchronic usage is how a usage is used during this time. Like right now, how we're using a word is a synchronic usage. But diachronic is over a period of time, how words have changed over a period of time. Words do change, absolutely. And if in the field the word changes for whatever reason, okay, fine. People will adopt that. Oppie pointed that out one time. He said, usage overrides things. And in a way, he's right in field, because if the way the scientists start using a word, that will probably change because they're using it that way, right? That's a utility argument. And I don't think Oppie is incorrect on that. But there's something to be said on it. But the problem is now you start dealing with things that would lead to logical ambiguities. Why would we take something and make it less precise, less rigorous? If we have a definition for,
when science chooses to use a word that we already use and then define it in a specific way, they're using it as a descriptor and they do stick to that.
Yeah, or they're using
specify that. And they use it in that way consistently, so that it would fall under the criteria.
Or they might prescribe it.
Adopting this word to utilize it.
Or they might prescribe it.
Yes.
Because in mathematics, a mathematical definition is prescriptive, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a prescriptive definition. Let's just say, just arguendo, 0 factorial equals 1. Okay. Now there's some people out there. There's some ways you can show that, and I get that with the Zeta-Riemann function, but realistically, it's defined to be the case. Or an infinite sequence is defined to be, and there's a mathematical formula for it. These are actual definitions, right? They're not just an equal sign; they're 3 lines, which means defined to be.
What came first, pi or pi? Is it somebody who just wanted actual pi to be infinite?
Yeah, but for example, Helios, if I said, "Hey, I think we should redefine pi not to be 3.14159 or whatever formula you can do. There's formulas for it, but I think we should define pi as 3.1." Right? Oh, you could do that, and you could probably get away with saying I'm defining it to be 3.14159 and use it in most applications, right? But you lost your rigor there, right? This is what I see happening with people trying to redefine atheism outside the field for their own stipulative usages. Sure, you can do it, but why? What's the advantage? Because you're basically watering down the term, but fine. But what I can't understand is why they say Steve's wrong about how it's used in the literature. And there's reasons. There's epistemic reasons why. There's avoiding of logical ambiguities why. There's avoidance of category errors why. This is why I don't think it will ever change in the philosophical field, because why would you change pi for the same reason? It works.
if we want to
We're
change
losing
pi,
Helios. He's slowly sliding off the camera.
Sorry.
sorry about that.
Now, I'm not trying to say they're exactly equal, obviously,
We-
because pi is
we're
a
good
natural a unit, right? So I mean, it exists regardless of how we define it. But you could redefine it for application for utility purposes. Yeah.
Lost the chat.
Okay. What else?
Um,
Questions?
We got intellectual or more made of statement. Agnosticism is a position. It's the scientific position. I stand in the place of no belief, unpersuaded by the evidence for or against.
Well, it's not a scientific
I do not
position.
feel strongly one way or the other.
Yeah, it's not a scientific position. It originally started off. Okay, let me clarify it again. Agnosticism had three particular uses. Okay, one as a scientific method is called an epistemic normative principle that Huxley came up with. That's archaic. Nobody uses that. Or two, the epistemological proposition, which deals with the knowability of God. Can gods be known? Not really used that often that way. That would be the most broadest sense. This is why you see it defined in general dictionaries that way, because that's the most broadest interpretation. But that's not how it's used either. The third one is basically a psychological position of being agnostic. What that just basically means is I have no position either way. So if I said, hey, see this cup, Cheshire? See it? I know you. Yeah, I know it's invisible to you, but right. But I say, hey, this cup is actually yellow, right? Well, how do you know it's how do you,
our candy?
you have no idea if that's a yellow cup or not because it's invisible to you right now. It's right.
I would probably be suspicious of you telling me it's yellow if I can't see it.
Yeah,
right
well,
now.
I mean, you could argue, oh well, I've got a green
green.
screen, so it's probably green, right? You can make an inductive argument, all right? That's fine, but you can't. If I didn't have the green screen, if it's just something that you didn't have any way of determining what color it was, and I say this cup is yellow, your most reasonable position is I have no position on that either way. I don't believe it's yellow, and I don't believe it's not yellow, right? That's agnostic. It's a belief position. It's a second order belief position. So when people start talking about knowledge, whenever I hear people talk about knowledge about Gnosticism, I know they've really never read anything else, because they're trying to change it to be one predicate, which is belief, into a different, which is knowledge, and they're different predications. But I mean, somebody who really knows the topic can talk about knowledge. But I know those types. I know the ones that actually have read, and they understand the difference. But those aren't the general people that I'm referring to. But that's why agnostic means I do not have a belief position either way. Agnosticism is not a knowledge position in that case. Yeah.
Next question was, what's the difference between sensible and sensical?
Sensible. Well, sensible means it appeases the senses, right? It makes sense. But sensical is not actually a word defined in Merriam-Webster or anything. It's nonsensical. Although I think it's starting to come around. It's one of those things that's been so much in usage that they're probably accepting of it now. But when I was growing up, sensicality or sensical, there just wasn't a word for it. It was just nonsensical. But sensible would be something that's similar. Yeah, it's just not.
Has anyone
Makes
really
sense.
been far? Has anyone really been far even as decided to use even go what to do look more like? You're welcome. I asked the panel.
Can you do that in backwards? Say it backwards.
Like more look do to want go even used to decide as even far been really anyone has.
Okay, try reading again. Maybe can you interpret it? Maybe.
Has anyone really been as far to decide to even use? I don't know the last part. Go want to do look more even like is not sensical to me.
Yeah. Sorry, I can't parse
whoever
that.
wrote that, are you okay?
Yeah, whatever you're having, share. Pass the duchy to the left-hand side.
Does one have to be Christian to be Christ-like? I think Gary wrote that comment.
No. There are atheist Christians.
No.
I mean, they're called Christian atheists. They're not Christian. They're a subset of atheists. They're not a subset of Christians. But yeah, you can actually hold to the philosophy of Christianity, but not accept the divinity of Christ or being there's a supernatural. Sure.
Well, back when I was Christian, I always used to use the a phrase I learned from Narnia, actually,
I love Narnia.
the book series. Oh, I used to read the first 4 books every night.
Yeah, those are great
Um,
stories.
That's a lot of reading.
yes, I love to read. um, at the very end, when people are like, "Oh, we were, not following you, Aslan," and stuff like that, it's like, well, even the things that you did in the donkey's name, you actually did in mine because they were good. You don't need to do something in God's name for it to be good and taken by God. Well, that was my argument back then. All good is inherently Christian and given to God. All evil is non-Christian and given to Satan. That's a position I used to hold.
That's a pretty standard, probably Christian viewpoint. And then evil would be most Christians, I think, tend to think or describe evil. It was called the privatization of good, or the absence of good, right? So anything that's not good, anything that's absence of good, would be considered evil. Um, I don't particularly think that's a way I would describe evil, but that's how they do
Um,
privatization of good. Yeah, go ahead.
Steve, can you give an example of an epistemic limit?
Yeah, like if reality is such that exists external to the mind that we don't have access to, like a brain of the vat, anything outside of that vat would be outside of that brain's epistemic limit, right? It can never actually know anything about that reality if it does exist. So there might be certain concepts, in theory, of course, that exist outside of our ability to ever know. For example, the multiverse kind of thing. Sure, we mathematically can show that there might be second level, third level, possibly even fourth level multiverses, but the knowledge
Can't
of
know what
that,
you don't know.
the knowledge of that is forever outside of our ability to know, right? Because we cannot know that, because those things are spatial temporally isolated from us. We can never interact with those other universes. Right? We can only mathematically maybe show them the possibility they exist, but anything else, anything in those realms are forever isolated from us. We have an epistemic limitation when it comes to knowing what's out there, or even outside our level one multiverse, even inside the Hubble volume. Anything beyond that, we can make really good predictions and educated guesses, but I don't think we could ever describe it as knowledge. But knowledge requires very specific conditions to be known. Right? You know the conditions, Helios? What?
The conditions to be considered knowledge.
Yeah, in a very basal way, right? The justified true belief is the most simplistic version of theories of knowledge. It's just basically it has to be true, you have to believe it, and you have to be justified to believe it. If you can meet those three conditions, you are okay to say you know something. It gets a lot more complicated than that, though, very quickly.
Yeah. And see, I would slightly disagree with you that there's never a possibility that we could experience something outside of the level one multiverse, because we don't know what happens at certain limits. If we develop something which allows us to travel faster than the speed of light,
it wouldn't matter. These are they're spatial temporally locked and isolated from us. There's no possibility to travel one from the other.
Yeah. Okay, but if I recall correctly, didn't you previously on the last stream you did, or maybe the stream before that, define the level one multiverse as the Hubble limit?
The Hubble volume, yeah.
Yep. So if we eventually made a ship that could travel faster than the expansion rate of the universe via, I don't know, maybe the collapsed space drive or some other thing like that, where you're not actually moving, but you're collapsing the space via gravity well in front of you. You could, in theory, get that
for a level one, possibly. Level two, there is vastly different than that. The level twos, these are actual isolations. But level one, sure. If you could overcome the gravitational expansion and develop some kind of Akubari warp bubble where you're traveling faster than the speed of light, which is plausible. then in theory, that might be the case. Sure. For
Yeah.
level 1.
Yeah,
I'll probably go
Remember
with that.
Sammy Jenkins. Jenkins asks, is foundationalism choosing a point in JTB to stop the infinite regression, or have I got it wrong?
JTB.
Yeah.
Or just, are you talking about the problem? I think he's talking about the dilemma of inferential justification.
Okay.
You can read it to me again, but I want to make sure he's asking right.
Is foundationalism choosing a point in JTB to stop the
That's what you believe,
infinite
okay.
regression, or have I got it wrong?
It's not. It wouldn't be in JTB per se. I don't think that's justified true belief, but I think there's something called the dilemma of inferential justification, where if you believe something and you justify it, are you justified to believe that you're justified to believe that you're justified to believe? It's very. I've actually had made the analogy to the KK principle, but I think Ozzy kind of shut me down on it a little bit. But fine. But the KK principle is very similar. Like, I know that I know that I know that I know. Right. So if you know something, you know that you know it. Right. That's KK principle. But the problem with inferential justification is if I am justified to believe something, I then have to justify that justification for that belief, and I didn't have to justify that justification for that justification for that justification for that belief. That's an infinite regression. You can appeal to what's called infinitism, which he was talking about, to try to avoid that. That's I think it's an external appeal. I really hate external and internal justifications. It drives me crazy trying to think which one's what. I don't know why, but it drives me nuts. And I see it happen all the time. People shift from internal to external. But you can appeal to infinitism to try to remove that problem with the dilemma of inferential justification. So it's not so much the justified true belief, but with the justification of those beliefs. Does that make sense, Sammy Jenkins?
I would just like to point out that we're almost at 150, and somebody in the chat asked who Helios was, and I would like to answer that by saying Helios 757 for $5.
Yeah.
Does that tell you
There you
who
go.
Helios is?
Yeah.
Helios, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself, maybe? You don't have to if you don't want to.
Do it.
As far as who I am, I'm a guy who made this channel purely to poke fun at PewDiePie while he was being scared in Insomnia, or Amnesia, Perfect Dark, or whatever that game's name is. Then I began watching.
That's a little bit old school.
Yeah. Then I began watching other channels, and eventually I caught the non sequitur, and
Sounds like a disease.
Yeah.
I caught the non sequitur.
Then I was like, who the hell is this Steve guy?
We're gonna have to run with that. We'll have to inoculate people from non sequitur.
And from there, he got me into a whole bunch of channels, and I've decided just to pay it forward.
Have you? So I mean, since you have done that, have you like experienced new things and learned new things? You think it's kind of opened your mind to maybe things that you just when you were in the theism, you probably never would even crossed your mind or thought about?
Oh, I was already atheist before I discovered non sequitur. What that did instead was help me find tools that I didn't know previously existed, because everything I was doing before was shots in the dark. It was, if I find something interesting, I would research it, look it up, and study it. And then a whole lot of time doing thought experiments in my own mind.
I do that a lot.
Non sequitur then introduced me to various philosophy people, and then I watched their shows and I heard their arguments, and that helped clarify things for me. After that, it was a lot of finally having terms and names for things that I just thought beforehand.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you're developing, your worldview, and developing your positions in these topics, and I think that's
expanding your horizons,
expanding your mind, and I think that's the greatest thing. Look, I told you something the other day. It's not so much whether you're an atheist or theist. Critical thinking, I think, supersedes either of those positions. Being a critical thinker and learning how to think and why it's better to be reasonable and learn a little bit about reason and logic probably will maybe get people to atheism. Who knows? Whatever. But atheism doesn't get you anywhere. Theism doesn't get you anywhere. Critical thinking gives you the tools to get you somewhere. That's the way I look at it. But somebody had asked in the live chat about if we see some alien race that's technologically advanced, is that God? No, I've described as a supernatural being that can prescriptively change the laws of the universe. If they exist corporeally as aliens on some planet that has an evolutionary history, that wouldn't to me be in that as a god. So to me,
Controller Dice made a really good comment. Said that non sequitur definitely became a disease.
yeah, it's an STD.
Dude,
Well, we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna try to hopefully one day rectify that. Got 2 more days before the judge can actually sign, so I hope he does Friday. But it's weekend coming up, so maybe Monday. I know, and Oshkosh Bajosh, he found me through Cockerduck. Hey, Osh, good seeing you, buddy.
Asha is awesome.
Yeah, Osh is a good guy.
We do have one last question. It's what's the philosophical definition of blue?
You know, it's funny. There's actually a paper out there. It was by wrote it. It was Bertrand Russell, I believe.
Of course there is.
Yeah, and there's not a definition of it, but he argues there was some people that argued out there that for proposition that when you say something is blue, you're arguing propositionally that it's not anything else. It's not yellow. It's not green. It's not blue. I mean, it's not red. So blue means anything other than blue, right? But there's some problems with that line of reasoning. And I think it was Russell that argued against that interpretation, that in proposition. If you want to ask that question, or detail on that, get a hold of Stephen Hoyt. He probably would know a little bit more about that than I would. But there's no specific word for that. Why would there be?
if I'm not mistaken, isn't there also a philosophical question that
Where's Ozzy
if
when you
you
need him?
see something as blue, that means it's anything but blue?
Well, that's what I was
because the
saying.
color
Yeah.
doesn't reflect itself.
Well,
So the light hitting it, it was reflecting the blue
optically.
light. Thus,
But I was talking
that
about
means it's
proposition.
everything but the color.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly
there's-
right.
Because
Right.
there would be physically, like optically, physically, there would be what Steve is talking about, but then there would be emotionally as well. You can be sad.
Yeah.
And then there's
Yes.
musically,
But
you could be the blues.
The argument goes into, and this kind of goes into what we were talking about with Rick Delano the other day with the res extensia. He called it it's res cognitive, res cognita, and res extensia. I think they're pronounced. This was Descartes' way of saying things that have qualitative versus quantitative versus qualitative, and the color blue, for example, right, is a sense perception. We see it visually in our mind, but if there's nobody around in the universe, if there's no intelligence, would a color exist? Because it's not anything that does exist until it's perceived. The color itself is not something that actually is a part of the base naive realism, and that's an argument to be had. What is then? What are properties that exist independent of sensory perception? Right, something could be actually measured quantitatively and not have to rely on qualitative things like sense and color and taste and textures, because those things have to have a person to do that, right? In order to smell something, you have to have something who can smell, who can taste. You have to have something who can taste. These qualitative things don't exist if there's nobody around to do those things. And then Descartes talks about this a lot. And I think this is an argument that Rick Delano was trying to use to try to put his BS geocentrism out there with what we call the at the end of quantum mechanics, or no, the end of quantum realism, I think it's called, which I haven't seen yet. But there's a roundabout way of saying, yeah, there's no such word for that I'm aware of. Why would there be? But yeah,
If
you're right.
you're
You're right.
Yeah. I mean, also, if you're going that route where it's blue because we sense it, then literally everything isn't real. It's just a hallucination in our head, and the only thing that's really out there is a whole bunch of electrons.
Welcome to idealism.
Never go full solipsism.
Never go full solipsism. Yeah, you could argue that solipsism is an extreme case of I don't know if it would be solipsism in the extreme case of idealism or idealism is an extreme case of solipsism. I think it depends how you want to use the term. Solipsism is generally understood as the belief that external minds do not exist. Right? That's generally what is. But there's more narrow versions of solipsism to say that that reality itself doesn't exist. But
Yeah.
I don't think it's generally used that way.
To my understanding of solipsism, isn't that the one that says nothing is real, nothing exists, and the only thing that is actually real and existent is my own mind, and it's just creating everything.
That would be the wide version of it.
else.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's a narrow interpretation of solipsism, which is just the belief that the belief that external minds do exist, and then the more wider interpretation that not only do external minds don't exist, but reality itself doesn't exist, which is all internalized, which to me is an extreme form of idealism as well. And there's also what's called monistic idealism, where we're all existing in the mind of God. Interesting.
We're all just God's wet dream, apparently.
Yeah, we have God's nightmare. But anyways,
It's just a bad game of Sims.
Did you at least get to kind of wrap it up and put a bow on it? Do you at least get now though how I and the literature uses the term agnosticism and atheism? They're not the same thing. Atheist and you can be an atheist or you can be agnostic. They're mutually exclusive in this paradigm in this schema, and there's reasons for that. And so most agnostics don't want to be subsumed under atheism because they're using it as a completely philosophical way, and they're saying I don't want to be a part of your group. I don't hold that particular position. But that's why they want to change atheism to mean, oh, well, if you don't believe, you're an atheist, regardless. David Silman tried that once, remember, way back when, and that didn't work out too well for him. And in fact, he might be changing things because he doesn't want to talk about that anymore. He's like,
he's been through a lot of stuff recently.
He's got other stuff on his mind.
But
if you notice, so he's been telling people I've changed a lot, and I'm not as I don't think he's the firebrand.
I'm looking forward to having him back. I'm looking forward to having him back at some point to be able to actually explore that a little bit more when he's in a little bit of a better place, hopefully.
Yeah, but you notice something. We got along fabulously, right? I had no issues with David Silverman. He was communicative.
It's because when you type, you don't sound like the way you speak. We've talked about it.
Well, I agree, but I don't talk. But even Dave doesn't care. Dave's never blocked me on Twitter. He didn't give a shit. But yeah, my Twitter, the way I type on Twitter is not how I speak, and not how I am in real life either.
Need more commas.
I need more commas. Yeah, I need more commas. All right,
you do come up very attacky on Twitter.
Yeah, it's aggressive, and I get that. I understand that because that's how you type something in caps. I use caps to have more of a emphasis, right? And what I probably should do is, and I've said to myself I should start doing this, but use asterisk, right? Asterisk in the word or italicize, but then that's a little more difficult to do on Twitter. But I got to wrap this up. Helios, man, you do this awesome. I expect people to if they want to know this to message me. A lot of people have, and I expected more people to come in here, but they didn't show, so I couldn't get a hold of them. But next time for those people that wanted to join in. So what do you want to leave us with, Helios?
Sometime. This is good.
Yeah, I'm going to have more of these topics. People do like this stuff, even though here's the thing: I can't please everybody, and then when I have something like this, and I post it on Facebook and be like, "Oh my God, Steve's talking about agnosticism again." Okay, then I'll post something on non sequitur. Oh my God, Steve's talking about non sequitur again. Then I'll post something on science. Oh my God, Steve's talking about evolution again. You can't fucking win, people. You just can't fucking win.
Don't forget to like, share, and sub.
Go ahead, show.
As Steve is yelling at everybody.
Oh, I wasn't done yelling yet. I want the first person. I'm waiting for that person to go. Matt Dillahunt, he's talking about atheism again. God damn it. Go ahead.
Don't forget to like, share, sub, hit that little notification. Check out the store. We got mugs. We got a couple new mugs now too. Go check them out.
We got chugs, mugs, and fugs.
Fugs.
Pugs.
I thought you said pugs there for a moment. I was like, you're sending dogs to people?
Vibrant Brantley said he would invite it. He would. Well, all you got, dude. If you got a wrench, anybody can come in. I mean, most of the time, unless we're, I want to get a one-on-one for a little while. But if we eventually open things up, now I have got people emailing me, be on the mailing list for links to join. The there's a new email just for that in the video description. It's a temporary email. I'm only using it to collect this, and then I'm never going to use it again probably. But I have a separate email just for people that want to send me an invite or their email, so I can get into a master list where when I have these open hangouts, I just send an email out and everybody gets the link to join all at once because I can hold 100 people now on the Google Meets. Okay, so
so I will leave you then still with a question or a thought. The whole reason that I view those as, even if they're not sensible, they may be useful, was because they helped define things for people. Because not all atheists are the same, not all theists are the same, not all agnostics are the same. Right now, those very broad terms, they don't really tell us much about what a person believes. So what would be your proposition on how to better clarify, better make those words actually mean something?
I would relate them to epistemic dispositions. There are three main epistemic dispositions. I can't even think of any others, but towards a proposition: believe, disbelieve, or suspend judgment. And you just assign a word to that. So I believe, theist. I don't. I believe it's false, atheist, and I don't believe either way, agnostic. Boom, there you go. Now when somebody says, "Hey, I'm agnostic," okay, they don't believe either way. Oh, I'm atheist. Oh, you believe gods don't exist. That to me is a very simple, easy. This is why it's in the literature that way. Even simple atheism is defined by P.K. Moser in his paper on epistemic justification as the simplest way to define atheism is the belief that God does not exist. That's the way he even says in the first page of his paper. So there's reasons why I think that paradigm makes a lot more sense. But of course, then, the people in the atheist experience have made that argument. Well, then we have to change it to the non-theist experience. And I'm like, no, you don't. You can still adopt the weaker sensu lato definition of atheism, the sensu lato, sensu stricto, and sensu strictissimo versions of certain words. Sensu lato would be the general, most broadest. Sensu stricto is a more strict, more rigorous, and sensu strictissimo is obviously the most strictest, right? But the sensu lato, which is the colloquial understanding of the word, they can use it that way. I don't care they use it that way. My objections with them is they use it dishonestly.
For anybody who is wondering, the chug is me, smug is Steve, obviously, and the fug was a special for when Red's Rhetoric was on here. So it is the ugliest mug you will ever own. The fug.
Fug. Yeah. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Ozzy says he still wants to do the ichthyosis thing. He's really looking forward to that. I'm going to try to do that Friday, maybe, hopefully. I know Nick wants to as well. And then we got some other things planned. I'll keep you guys posted on the non sequitur thing. I'm also having a exclusion list on Facebook. If you follow me on Facebook, I do have like 5,000 people on Facebook, so I'm making an exclusionary list for the people that don't want to hear about the non sequitur stuff. I get it. Just let me know. So far, there's only 2 people on that list. Kind of inconvenient.
Oh yeah, and once I'm back on Twitter, I did go on a banning spree before I was actually stuck in jail loop. So anybody who I will be making my ban list public. So anybody who wants to use my ban list as a reference will be able to do so.
Okay. And again, that's not advocating you have to ban these people. It's just that.
No. It's not saying that you should. It's just people were asking me for, hey, who should we look out for? What do we not want to get involved in? People who are not interested in specific kinds of drama and stuff. It's just to make.
Yeah.
And specifically people who are dangerous to engage with that they will actually.
I'm sure I'm on many lists. When people saying, hey, put Steve on this list and put him on the ban list, I'm okay with that. It does me a favor because the people that will ban me and not engage with me are not the people I want around my channel anyways, or Twitter.
And yes,
so they're doing me a favor if I go on a ban list like that.
And you still have time to send me your I am non sequitur. So just send that to my email. And the only rule is that if you don't want your actual name showing that whatever is in your email, just put your name in the description.
How many more do you need? How many have you gotten?
As many as I can get. I got lots.
All right.
Give me
let's get more.
If you want to be in it, come be in it. So
there you go, people.
You still got time. I'm going to actually repost that on Twitter soon enough.
Repost it on Twitter.
Because the time has now been extended for like another 2 weeks.
I recommend everybody, if you're not on Twitter, go get Twitter. It's the easiest way to communicate with people. It's pretty much my primary. I don't really use Facebook for communication as much at all. So if you message me on Facebook,
you can watch Steve get into Twitter arguments all day.
Yeah, it's fun. And by the way, Discord's even worse. If you message me on Discord, I probably won't get it for a month.
God.
I'm
Don't even bother.
yeah, don't even bother on Discord. I'll never get it. Smitty goes, I believe there's a cannibal infinity negative numbers of gods. What's my label?
It's actually going to be published through Twitter. Twitter has an option where you
I'll
can
call your
publish
a cardinality
events, so
of.
it'll actually be-
Oh, hang on. I'm call Smith. I'm gonna make up word for Smitty. I'll call that cardinality of the cardinals of. Yeah, the cardinals, like Catholic, the cardinality of the cardinals. There you go. I don't know.
Cardinal. Okay.
Well, cardinality deals with
the
countable infinities and things of alpha. Alpha 1? No. Oh, okay.
It's essentially just my list of people that I have banned will be made public, so you can see who I have banned.
Yeah. Okay.
That's all.
All right. Well, I'm gonna leave that and go on Twitter and find out why I want my earrings back.
Yes, your earrings.
150 days.
People, you're not gonna know what that is unless you go on Twitter and find out why I want my earrings back. There you go. Good night.
God.
Good
Bye,
night.
guys.
Good
See you
night.
next time.